Hello friends, welcome to Premier UPSC Ias. So as we were discussing different topics from modern history, today we are going to continue from Simon Commission. Simon Commission of 1927. The Government of India Act 1919 Montfort Act had a provision for a commission to be appointed after 10 years to study the progress of the government scheme and suggest the new steps. In pursuance, a seven-member Indian Statutory Commission was appointed on November 8, 1927, 2 years before the due date. It was also known as Simon Commission as it was chaired by Sir John Simon. The commission was mandated to recommend to the British government whether India was ready for the further constitutional reforms. However, the irony was that the commission had no representation of the Indians in it. Reasons for early appointments. As mentioned, the constitutional reforms were due only in 1929, but the Conservative government was in power in Britain. Then it feared defeat by the Labour Party in the upcoming elections. The Conservative Party was pro-imperialist and thus did not want to leave the question of the future of Britain's most prized colony into the so-called irresponsible Labour hands. The Act of 1919 was also a failure and it couldn't create a stable imperial power. Several parliamentary committees noted these failures. The Lee Commission noted the failure of the government to recruit enough British officers. The Muddiman Commission looked into the deadlock due to the diarchy form of government. The Linlithgow Commission inquired into the crisis of Indian agriculture. Thus, the Secretary of State for India, Lord Birkenhead, in 1927 made the appointment of the Simon Commission. Lord Birkenhead was one of the opinion that Indians were incapable of forming a consensus on constitutional reforms. He even challenged to come up with a constitutional framework. Response by the Indians. The Indian response to the Simon Commission was immediate and nearly unanimous. The exclusion of the Indians from the commission angered everyone. The idea that foreigners would discuss and decide upon India's fitness for self-government was indigestible for one and all. It was also seen as a violation of the principle of self-determination and a deliberate insult to the self-respect of Indians. The Congress session in December 1927 at Madras under the presidency of M.A. Ansari passed a resolution to boycott the commission at every stage and in every form. Even the Hindu Mahasabha and the majority faction of the Muslim League under Jinnah supported the Congress resolution. There were two factions of Muslim League. They had two sessions in 1927, such as one under Jinnah at Calcutta, where it was decided to oppose the Simon Commission, and another at Lahore under Muhammad Shafi, who supported the government. There were others who didn't boycott the commission, such as Unionists in Punjab and the Justice Party in the South. Opposition of Simon Commission. The commission landed in Bombay on February 3, 1928, and a country-wide hartal was organized with mass rallies. People waved black flags at the commission and shouted slogans of Simon go back. The significant part in the movement against the Simon Commission was played by the youth. Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose ably led this new wave of youth and students. The socialism and radical ideas spread, which is reflected in the emergence of groups such as the Punjab Naujawan Bharat Sabha, Workers and Peasants Parties, and Hindustani Seva Dal in Karnataka. Repression by the police. The police severely tried to repress the demonstrations. There were lathi charges on everyone. Even the senior leaders Jawaharlal Nehru and G.B. Pant were beaten up in Lucknow. In Punjab, Lala Lajpat Rai received severe blows on his chest in October 1928 and he died on November 17, 1928. This was one of the reasons for the growth of revolutionary activities led by Bhagat Singh in Punjab discussed in the previous class. Dr. B. R. Ambedkar and Simon Commission. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was appointed by the Bombay Legislative Council to work with the Simon Commission. In October 1928, Ambedkar argued for the universal adult franchise for both male and female alike before the Commission. This was a significant demand at the time because universal adult franchise was not in place even in most of the European countries. He also argued for provincial autonomy and diarchy at center. On behalf of Bahishkrit Hitakarini Sabha, he demanded the rights and safeguards for the depressed classes. He demanded the depressed classes to be treated as a minority and provide them with far greater political protection than any other minority because of its educational backwardness, its economically poor condition, and its social enslavement. He wanted reserved seats for the depressed classes if the universal adult franchise was granted. In case of universal franchise was not granted, Ambedkar said he would campaign for a separate electorate for the depressed classes. He also demanded certain safeguards to be included in the newly formed constitution. Simon Commission recommendations. The Simon Commission submitted its report in May 1930, provincial level. It proposed the abolition of diarchy at the provinces and autonomy for the provinces. It retained the discretion of the governor in relation to internal security and administrative powers to protect the different communities. The number of members of the provincial legislative council was proposed to be increased. At central level, it rejected parliamentary responsibility at the center. The Governor General was to have complete power to appoint the members of the cabinet. The Government of India would have complete control over the High Court. Others, it recommended the communal electorate to be continued and extended to such other communities. It rejected the universal adult franchise. Federalism. It accepted the idea of federalism but not in the near future. Instead, it suggested that a consultative council of Greater India should be established, which should include representatives of both the British provinces as well as princely states. Legislatures for Northwest Frontier Province and Baluchistan were proposed along with their right to be represented at the center. Sindh was to be separated from the Bombay and Burma from India. Nehru Report of 1928 and its reaction. Nehru Report. To answer to Lord Birkenhead's challenge, an all-party conference was organized in February 1928. The conference appointed a subcommittee to draft a constitution under the chairmanship of Motilal Nehru and the following members: Tej Bahadur Sapru, Subhash Bose, M.S. Ane, Mangal Singh, Ali Imam, Shuab Qureshi, and G.R. Pradhan. This was the first major attempt by the Indians to draft a constitutional framework for the country. They came out with a report by August 1928. They were unanimous in its recommendation except for dominant status. A minority of them favored complete independence. Nehru Report recommendations. Dominion status on lines of self-governing dominions was the form of government desired by Indians, which was rejected by the younger members. Rejection of separate electorates. Instead demanded joint electorates with the reservation of seats for Muslims at the center and in provinces where they were in minority. In provinces where Muslims were in majority, there in proportion to the Muslim population with the right to contest additional seats. Creation of provinces on linguistic lines. 19 fundamental rights including equal rights for women, the right to form unions and universal adult suffrage. Responsible government at both the center and in provinces. The Indian Parliament at the center to consist of a 500-member House of Representatives elected on the basis of adult suffrage and a 200-member Senate to be elected by provincial councils. The central government to be headed by a Governor General appointed by the British government but paid out of Indian revenues, who would act on the advice of the Central Executive Council responsible to the Parliament. Provincial councils to have a 5-year tenure headed by a governor acting on the advice of Provincial Executive Council. Controversies. Full protection was to be given to the cultural and religious interests of Muslims, and there was to be complete dissociation of state from religion. Though there was unity in the process of drafting a constitutional framework, communal differences crept in. The Nehru report got involved in the controversies over the issue of communal representation. The Muslim League and Hindu Mahasabha proposed their respective demands to be included in the draft framework. Delhi proposals of Muslim League. The Muslim League met in December 1927 at Delhi and evolved the four proposals for their demands to be incorporated into the draft constitution. These proposals were accepted by Madras session of the Congress of December 1927. The following came to be known as Delhi proposals. Joint electorates in place of separate electorates with reserved seats for Muslims. One-third representation to Muslims in the Central Legislative Assembly. Representation to Muslims in Punjab and Bengal in proportion to their population. Formation of three new Muslim majority provinces, Sindh, Balochistan and Northwest Frontier Province. Demands by the Hindu Mahasabha. The Hindu Mahasabha opposed the proposal for creating new Muslim majority provinces and reservation of seats for Muslim majorities in Punjab and Bengal. According to them, it would ensure Muslim control over legislatures in both. It also demanded a strictly unitary structure. The demands of both the parties were conciliated and a compromise was struck in the report with the following. Joint electorates proposed were everywhere, but reservation for Muslims only were in minority. And Sindh to be detached from Bombay only after the dominion status was granted. Amendments proposed by Jinnah at all parties conference held at Calcutta in December 1928 to consider the Nehru report. Jinnah proposed amendments to the report on behalf of Muslim League, such as one-third representation in the central legislature, reservation to Muslims in Bengal and Punjab legislatures, proportionate to their population until adult suffrage was established, and residual powers to provinces. 14 points of Jinnah. Jinnah's demands were not accepted, so Jinnah went back to Shafi faction in March 1929 and gave 14 points such as federalism with residual powers to provinces, provincial autonomy, a constitutional amendment cannot be passed by the center without the acceptance of the states in the federation, adequate representation of Muslims in every province without reducing a majority of Muslims in a province to a minority or equality, adequate representation to Muslims in the services and in self-governing bodies, one-third of Muslim representation in the central legislature, one-third members to be Muslims in cabinet, separate electorates, no bill or resolution to be passed in three-fourths of minority community considered such bill or resolution to be against their interests. Any territorial redistribution not to affect the Muslim majority in Punjab, Bengal and Northwest Frontier Province. Constitutional reforms in the Northwest Frontier Province and Balochistan. Separation of Sindh from Bombay. Full religious freedom to all communities. Protection of Muslim rights in religion, culture, education and language. Failure of the Nehru report. The Muslim League, the Hindu Mahasabha and the Sikh community were unhappy about the Nehru report. Even the younger members of the Congress led by Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Bose were also angered over the idea of dominion status in this report as a step backward. Nehru and Subhash Bose rejected the Congress' modified goal and jointly set up the Independence for India League. Civil Disobedience Movement. Background to the Civil Disobedience Movement CDM. Nehru report was approved at Calcutta session in 1928. But younger leaders expressed their dissatisfaction and demanded Congress to be adopted Purna Swaraj as its goal. The older leaders suggested 2 years grace period to be given to the government to accept the demand for dominion status. But under pressure from younger leaders, it was reduced to 1 year. It was thus decided that if the government did not accept the constitution based on dominion status by the end of the year, the Congress would not only demand complete independence but would also launch a civil disobedience movement to attain its goal. Irwin's declaration. Lord Irwin made a declaration to restore the faith in the ultimate purpose of British policy in the Indian Gazette on October 31, 1929. The declaration promised a dominion status, but there was no time scale. The promise by Irwin would not be available for a long time to come and was in reality nothing new or revolutionary in the declaration. He also promised a round table conference after the Simon Commission submitted its report. Delhi Manifesto. The prominent leaders issued a Delhi Manifesto on November 2, 1929, with the following conditions for attending the round table conferences. The purpose of the Round Table Conference should be not to determine whether or when dominion status was to be reached, but the principle of dominion status should be immediately accepted. Congress should have majority representation at the conference. There should be a general amnesty for political prisoners and a policy of conciliation. Irwin rejected the demands of Delhi Manifesto. Lahore Session and Purna Swaraj in 1929. Jawaharlal Nehru was nominated the president for the Lahore session of the Congress in December 1929, mainly due to the Gandhi's backing. Even though 15 out of 18 provincial Congress committees had opposed Nehru, Gandhi supported Nehru because Nehru had done more than anyone else to popularize the concept of Purna Swaraj. It was acknowledgement of the upsurge of youth which made the anti-Simon campaign a huge success. The following decisions were taken at the Lahore session. The Round Table Conference was to be boycotted. Complete independence was declared as the aim of Congress. Congress Working Committee was authorized to launch the program of civil disobedience, including non-payment of taxes, and all members of legislatures were asked to resign their seats. January 26, 1930 was fixed as the first independence as the Swarajya Day to be celebrated everywhere. At midnight on the banks of River Ravi, the newly adopted tricolor flag of freedom was hoisted by Jawaharlal Nehru and slogans of Inqilab Zindabad were shouted. January 26, 1930 Independence Pledge. Public meetings were organized all over the country in villages and towns. Independence Pledge drafted by Gandhi was read out in local languages and national flag was hoisted. The Independence Pledge had the following points. It is the inalienable right of Indians to have freedom. The British government in India has not only deprived us of freedom and exploited us but also ruined us economically, politically, culturally, and spiritually. India must therefore sever the British connection and attain the Purna Swaraj. We are being economically ruined by high revenue, destruction of village industries with no substitutions made, while customs, currency, and exchange rate are manipulated to our disadvantage. No real political powers are given as rights of free association are denied to us, and all administrative talent in us is killed. Culturally, the system of education has torn us from our moorings. Spiritually, compulsory disarmament has made us unmanly. We hold it a crime against man and God to submit any longer to British rule. We will prepare for complete independence by withdrawing as far as possible all voluntary association from the British government and will prepare for civil disobedience through the non-payment of taxes. By this, an end of this inhumane rule is assured. Civil disobedience movement Gandhi's 11 demands. In pursuance with the decisions taken at Lahore Congress, Gandhi presented 11 demands and gave an ultimatum of 31st January 1930 to accept or reject the demands. The demands included the following: reduce the expenditure on army and civil services by 50%, introduce total prohibition, carry out reforms in the criminal investigation departments, Change Arms Act allowing popular control of the issue of firearms licenses. Release the political prisoners. Accept the postal reservation bill. Reduce rupee sterling exchange ratio. Introduce textile protection. Reduce land revenue by 50%. Abolish the salt tax and government salt monopoly. Reserve coastal shipping for Indians. There was no response from the government. Congress Working Committee gave Gandhi full powers to launch the civil disobedience movement at a time and place of his choice. Dandi March course of civil disobedience movement. On March 1930, Gandhi informed the Viceroy of his plan of action. According to this plan, Gandhi, along with 78 peoples of Sabarmati Ashram, would to march from Ahmedabad through the villages of Gujarat for 240 miles and reach the coast at Dandi. He announced that the salt law would be violated by collecting salt from the beach. Gandhi directed people to show civil disobedience of the salt law wherever possible. He asked them to picket foreign liquor and cloth shops. He asked Lloyds to give up the practice, refuse to pay taxes, and boycott courts. He also asked the government servants to resign. The march began on March 12th, and Gandhi broke the salt law by picking up a lump of salt at Dundee on April 6th. The violation of the law was seen as a symbol of Indian people's resolve not to live under British made laws and therefore under British rule. It evoked huge protests and demonstrations all over India. Gandhi was arrested on May 4, 1930, when he had announced that he would lead a raid on Dharasana salt works. As a response to Gandhi's arrest, the Congress Working Committee sanctioned the following: non-payment of revenue in Royatwari areas, non-chowkidari tax campaign in zamindari areas, and violation of the forest laws in the central provinces. As Gandhi was arrested before the raid on Dharasana salt works, Sarojini Naidu, Imam Sahib, and Mani Lal Gandhi's son took up the unfinished task, and on May 21, 1930, they raided it. The police restored to lathi charge on the unarmed and the peaceful crowd, which left two dead and 320 injured. People everywhere raided the salt works such as Vadala, Bombay, Karnataka, Sanikatta Salt Works, Midnapur, Balasore, Puri, and Cuttack. Sholapur in southern Maharashtra saw the fiercest response to the Gandhi's arrest. Textile workers went to strike, residents burned liquor shops and other symbols of government authorities such as railway stations, police stations, municipal buildings, law courts, etc. The activists established a virtual parallel government here and could only be dislodged with martial law after May 16. It was during this movement the maximum mobilization of masses happened, and innovative methods such as Prabhat Fairies, Vanar Senas, Manjari Senas, secret patrikas, and magic lantern shows were also used. Protests at different places in South. C. Rajagopalachari organized a march from Trichinopoly to Vedavaraniam on the Tanjore coast to break the salt law. The anti-liquor campaign gathered forceful support in interior regions of Tamil Nadu in Coimbatore, Madurai. K. Kalappan, a Congress who had led the Vaikom Satyagraha, organized the Salt March in Kerala. He has been called the Kerala Gandhi. District salt marches were organized in East and West Godavari, Krishna and Guntur of the Andhra Pradesh. Sibiram camps were set up to serve as the headquarters of the salt satyagraha. Protest at the different places in East. Under Gopal Bandhu Chaudhary, a Gandhian leader, salt satyagraha proved effective in the coastal regions of Balasore, Cuttack and Puri districts of Odisha. Cunningham Circular, which banned students' participation in politics, was protested successfully in Assam in May 1930. Chandraprabha Saikiani led the aboriginal Kachari villagers to break forest laws in December 1930. During the same period, Surya Sen Chittagong Revolt Group carried out a raid on two armories and declared the establishment of a provisional government. Champaran and Saran were the first two districts to start salt satyagraha. In the landlocked Bihar, manufacture of salt on a large scale was not practicable, and at most places it was a mere gesture. In Patna, Nakhas Pond was chosen as a site to make salt and break the salt law under Ambika Kant Sinha. A very powerful non-chowkidari tax agitation replaced the salt satyagraha in Bihar due to physical constraints in making salt. Protests at different places in Northwest. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, as educational and social reform, worked among the Pathans in Peshawar. He is also called the Badshah Khan and the Frontier Gandhi. He organized a volunteer brigade, Khudai Khidmatgars, also known as the Red Shirts. They pledged to the freedom struggle and non-violence. There were mass demonstrations in Peshawar, which was virtually in the hands of the crowds for more than a week until the order was restored using a reign of terror and martial law. A section of Garhwal rifle soldiers refused to fire on an unarmed crowd here. Rani Gaidinlu, a 13-year-old Rani Gaidinlu, a Naga spiritual leader who followed her cousin Haipu Jadonang, raised the banner of revolt against the foreign rule. The British authorities caught Haipu Jadonang and hanged him on charges of treason in 1931. Rani Gaidinliu outwitted the British until October 1932 when she was finally captured and sentenced to life imprisonment. The interim government of India set up in 1946 that finally ordered her release from Tura jail. Government's response: the ordinances banning civil liberties were issued. The provincial governments were given freedom to ban. Essential, there was civ- the provincial governments were given freedom to ban civil disobedience organizations. There were lathi charges and firing on unarmed crowds. The Congress Working Committee was declared illegal in June. Gandhi-Irwin Pact or Delhi Pact of 1931. In July 1930, Irwin suggested a round-table conference and reiterated the goal of no dominant status. Tej Bahadur Sapru and M.R. Jaikar, liberals, were asked to explore the possibility of peace between the Congress and the governments. Gandhi and all other members of the Congress Working Committee (CWC) were released unconditionally on January 25, 1931. The CWC authorized Gandhi to initiate discussions with the Viceroy. A pact was signed between the Viceroy representing the British Indian government and Gandhi representing the Indian people in Delhi on February 14, 1931. It placed the Congress on an equal footing with the government. As a part of the pact, Irwin agreed for the following: immediate release of all the political prisoners, remission of all fines, lenient treatment to those government servants, right to make salt coastal lines for personal, right to make salt in coastal villages for personal consumption, right to peaceful and non-aggressive picketing, withdrawal of emergency ordinances. He, however, rejected other demands of Gandhi, such as a public inquiry into police expenses and commutation of the Bhagat Singh and his comrades' death sentence to life sentence. As part of the pact, Gandhi agreed to the following: to suspend the civil disobedience movement, to participate in this next round table conference. The youth, however, was disappointed at the withdrawal of the movement, and the peasants of Gujarat were disappointed because their lands were not restored immediately. But many people were jubilant as the government regarded the movement as significant and treated the protesters as equal also because the political prisoners were released from jails. Karachi Congress special session of 1931 to endorse the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. Gandhi, on his way back to the Karachi, was greeted with black flags by the Punjab Naujawan Bharat Sabha for his failure to secure the commutation of the death sentence of their fellow comrades. At Karachi session, the Congress admired the bravery and sacrifice of the three martyrs and at the same time disapproved of and dissociated itself from the political violence. The Delhi Pact or the Gandhi-Irwin Pact was endorsed in this session. The goal of complete independence was reiterated. Following two resolutions were adopted such as fundamental rights and national economic program. The revolution on the fundamental rights guaranteed free speech and free press, right to freedom association, right to assemble, equal legal rights irrespective of caste, creed and sex, neutrality of state in religious matters, free and compulsory primary education, protection to culture, language, the script of minorities and linguistic groups. Resolution on the National Economic Program provided for substantial reduction in rent and revenue in the case of laborers and peasants, exemption from rent for uneconomic holdings, relief from agricultural indebtedness and control of usury. Better conditions of work, including a living wage, limited hours of work, and protection of women workers in the industrial sector, right to workers and peasants to form unions, state ownership and control of key industries, mines, and means of transport.